How are we doing, everybody? Welcome back to the Shaun Attwood channel. I'm Ron Swanson, and I'm here with Troy Anderson to go over your new book and the designated disruptor, and tell us a little bit about all of that, Troy. But before we do that, introduce yourself, let us know who you are, and of course, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, Ron. It's great to be on your show. So I've been a journalist for over 3 decades. I was a reporter at the Los Angeles Daily News for many years. I was executive editor of Charisma magazine, and I've spent the last 17 years investigating. Are we moving into these end time events the Bible talks about? And this new book's my ninth book. It's called Designated Disruptor: Trump and Other Unlikely Agents of Revival. And there's a long story behind that, but that's sort of the overview.
Okay, great. And can you sort of take us through it, if you will? Take us on a little bit of a journey here, if you will, Troy, um, about what that means and what you see unfolding with Trump and the rest. Well, because of course it's been a bit of a spicy start to the year, and what do you think it all means for what's to come?
Yeah, so I guess you try to summarize the journey. When I was little, my grandmother, Trella Hope Schiller, she said we're descended from Frederick von Schiller, the poet that wrote Ode to Joy and a number of famous plays like William Tell and Marie Stuart and those kind of things. And so when I was little, she talked about Schiller all the time, and so she encouraged me to follow in his footsteps. And so I remember when I went to college at the University of Oregon. I checked out the library to look up Schiller, and here's like this gigantic section of books all about Schiller. And so I thought, who is this guy? And so, I ended up becoming a journalist, working at newspapers for a couple of decades. And then a key event happened in 2009. There was a prophecy conference at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, and here in Southern California. And I talked to my editors at the Daily News to let me cover this. And there's probably like 3,000 people there. And, Tim LaHaye wrote the Left Behind series was there. And this guy named Paul McGuire used to be a nationally syndicated radio show host. He says, the world is undergoing the greatest transformation since the Tower of Babel, a coming global government, cashless society, and universal religion. And when he said that, I flashed back to when I was a kid. All these Jesus people from Southern California invaded my little hometown in Oregon in their VW vans. And one of these guys had trained under Hal Lindsey, the author of The Late Great Planet Earth, the best-selling book of the 1970s. And he gave me that book, so it sort of planted this interest in prophecy all my life. And so that was sort of the beginning of this what turned into a 17-year investigation into end-time events. And so to sort of take you through the whole story, wrote a whole bunch of books. Like the Babylon Code, Trumpocalypse. I did an interview with Billy Graham in 2013 for a 7-part World Net Daily series on the possibility of an end times revival. And he said, when God sent the prophet Jonah to Nineveh to warn of judgment, the king and the people repented, and he believed the same thing could happen again, this time in America. So we were so inspired by that we called for a National Day of Repentance in our second book, Trumpocalypse, came out in 2018. And a friend of mine I met when I was editor of Charisma, Kevin Jessup, he ran with it. He asked us to write the White House executive summary. He persuaded Rabbi Jonathan Cahn, a New York Times bestselling author, to be the spokesman. And this big event actually happened on the National Mall in D.C. About 250,000 people showed up. 42 million people watched this. First day of national repentance in America since Abraham Lincoln, and President Trump flew over in Marine One and issued a proclamation for a day of prayer and return. And then everybody thought he was going to win that election. Of course, he didn't. And I think God wanted to wake us up to just how evil and corrupt everything's become. And then last year, about I think it was April, it was the Great North American Eclipse, and it went through all these towns called Nineveh here in America. And so I wrote a story for Charisma. Is this our Nineveh moment? This big election's coming up, a chance to turn back to God. And Charisma asked me to write the Trump Code, which is the last book. And then after Trump got elected, I saw this revival breaking out, and so I wrote a Designated Disruptor. So that's sort of the overview.
Okay, and what would you describe a designated disruptor as? It sounds like almost like somebody who's chosen to shake things up, right? I mean, is it a positive thing? Is it a negative thing? It sounds negative, but again, it could. You guide me through it a little bit.
Yeah. So the idea for the book title Designated Disruptor is that, God's using some of the most unlikely people. President Trump. Here's these, sort of this, playboy billionaire, ends up becoming president, and now we're seeing this, sort of spiritual turnaround occurring in the world. This revival breaking out here in America and in Europe. There's polls showing 20-25% increase in professions of faith, church attendance, Bible reading, that kind of thing. Largely since Trump's reelection for some reason. And my Instagram feed's full of all these videos of like thousands of kids getting baptized and saved, and that kind of thing across the country. And so why is this happening? Why would God use somebody unlikely like President Trump? And if you look at the Bible, think about the story of Moses. He actually killed a guy, and he spent 40 years in the backside of the desert, and then God called him, and he actually met God, according to the book of Exodus, and he told God, I don't want to do this. I'm slow of speech. But yet, God used him to, deliver the Israelites from captivity in Egypt. Or, think about King David. He's the youngest boy, sort of overlooked. Later on, he, committed adultery with Bathsheba and sent her husband to the front lines where he was killed, this terrible sin. Yet God called him a man after his own heart and used him in a big way. And Jesus came from, King David's line. And there's many stories like that, throughout the Bible. Peter the fisherman, he died Christ 3 times. Samson and Delilah, God used him to, ultimately bring down the temple on top of the Philistines. And so all kinds of stories of unlikely people in the Bible. So we're sort of seeing the same thing today. Jordan Peterson, big podcaster, speaker, reached millions and millions of people talking about the Bible. Or, Jonathan Rumi, here's this guy plays Jesus in The Chosen, and that's become like one of the most popular TV series, sort of bringing to life the story of the gospel. Or Mel Gibson, we all know about his sort of crazy life, but yet he's actually in Europe right now making the 2-part sequel to The Passion of the Christ, one of the most impactful movies in modern times. So those are just some celebrities, but that's sort of a little preview.
Okay, I'm going to. Somebody in the side chat just here said, does that excuse the inhumanity of the disruptor?
Yeah, of course, it doesn't excuse the inhumanity. We're all fallen human beings, sinful, and make mistakes and do wrong things. And so, President Trump, he's very divisive, and a lot of times people don't understand what he's trying to do, and so it's sort of like this counterintuitive kind of thing that God could use somebody like this. But I think it's I think he's got sort of the skill set, the experience, the ability to deal with the media, deal with the political world, and be strong. Usually Republicans aren't usually that tough, and in today's world that's a necessary ingredient. So I think that's why God has picked him to lead us through this very, very tumultuous time in history.
Okay. And you'd mentioned, it's in the opening paragraph of your book website, your billionaires, tax collectors, comedians and fishermen, psychologists and outcasts. Who, when you think of billionaires and other individuals, we'll start with billionaires. Who else would you see as a designated disruptor?
Well, Elon Musk, comes to mind. He was, instrumental in this election, and then afterward he had the Department of Government Efficiency. Of course, that whole thing, became chaotic. But they did end up laying off a lot of people from the federal government, sort of this bloated bureaucracy and saving taxpayer money. Now I think he and President Trump sort of, rectified now, and so he's a designated disruptor. And there's many people out there. You think of like Peter Thiel's been doing these series on the Antichrist and talking about that's been quite popular, and there's just many different people that God is using in different ways.
Okay, so we're assigning this designated disruptor title to individuals who are being used in this interpretation by a higher force for their bidding, if you will. Is that what we're getting at here, right? Because that sounds like a lot of intrusion on free will then, and at the center of it all is free will, not the main cornerstone of the Christian faith, that your God is very much one who his entire mindset is I cannot interfere. It is about free choice. So could we not argue then that there's misrepresentation of what side that this deity is on that is interfering in this grandeur plan?
Yeah. The Bible makes it clear we all have free will. We can choose to, to do good, to do evil, and
Hmm.
and we do have free will. It's a very profound question that you're asking. Is how does God, work through our lives? And so I think it's, if we, put our trust in Him, He'll guide us. The Bible talks about guiding the steps of a righteous man, that kind of thing, and angels intervening in our lives and helping us in different ways and things like that. So while you have free will, I think God can work through us if we're willing, essentially. And He often, there's stories in the Bible like King Cyrus. He's a pagan king, but God, used him to, return the Israelites to Jerusalem. And there's different stories like that throughout the Bible where, God sort of, worked through different people, but we still have free will. So yeah, you've raised a very profound question, but I think the Bible explains that.
Yeah, I understand when you're saying that gods can work through people, and it still comes down to the choice of man. And I think that when we look across the world as a whole, it doesn't seem like the right side of the team's winning. There's a lot of horror and disruption and abuse and terror and double sides of the coin, if you will. Do you think that the population, the people, have a misunderstanding of the actions made by these individuals when it comes to, I mean, for example, Venezuela and the way that America went in? Probably the cleanest war I've ever seen in my life. What was it, like 3-4 hours long? They went in, they done the job, they got out. And then, of course, you heard all the rumors about the super soldiers and the drones and all of this. Was this just incredible PR marketing, or was it the reality? So do you think then, when these individuals, these designated disruptors, are still living in a world of secrecy, do you not think that that still leaves us with the ability to question their intent?
Well, yeah, I mean, just like the Bible makes clear, we're all, sinful human beings. We make mistakes and do bad things, to make wrong decisions. We have free will. So, these people aren't going to always make the right decision. And was that ultimately the right thing to do? Only time will tell. And they're all like you mentioned, there's all these things going on in the background. Are there actually super soldiers? What kind of things are being done today? What kind of technologies does the government have, and the kind of things were used to accomplish this mission? So these are all important questions, and we just don't know all the answers.
It's true. And another thing that I would say is the religion. Okay, because in the UK, I mean, we're a Christian country. We're seeing a lot of things happening here that are impinging on our cultures and way of life and things like this. Do you think that that is one of the missions that you're seeing with a lot of the mass deportation in America? Is that part of the designated disruptor plan?
Well, I think that the critical battle that's going on here is it's a sort of a fight between globalism and national sovereignty. And so a lot of my books have explored, are we moving into this one world government, cashless society, universal religion? The Apostle John warned of in the Book of
Yeah.
Revelation. So I think that's the central battle that's going on in the world, and it's playing out in Europe, it's playing out in America, it's playing out all over the planet. And the globalists are openly talking about this now at Davos and different places, and so it's sort of out in the open. It's a conversation that's taking place, and so I wrote a book called The Babylon Code. It's actually the expose of globalism. Came out in 2015, and this pastor loved the book so much he delivered a whole box of these books to the Trump team. And then in early 2016, Trump announced that Americanism, not globalism, would be a platform for president. And then he won that presidency. I don't know if the book played a role, but it's curious timing. And so it seems like the things he's done are sort of pushing back against open borders. We had millions of people coming into the country, and now he's attempting to turn that around.
Well, I mean,
criminals and that kind of thing.
Let's be honest. It's illegal migrants that we're talking about here. We're not talking about people that have went the appropriate channels, and a lot of the individuals who've come over, it is a massive task that Trump's doing. But of course, people always point the finger at Trump, but Obama was king of deportation. He was the master of getting rid of folk and replacing them with folk that were more inclined to vote for his side. But that's not what we're here to talk about. So let me talk about some other points that you've the Trump Code, exploring time travel, Nikola Tesla, the Trump lineage. That's one of those words for me, Troy. Lineage. I've got to say it twice, 2 or 3 times before my brain will let it actually come out. And America's future. Like, Tesla in itself is an incredible figure in history, right? I mean, there's so much that was just nipped in the bud that we'll never know about, that man wanted to gift upon us. Where does your, because a lot of people, when they're rooted in religion, they don't, they kind of stick rigorously within the aspects of that. And of course, you know, exploring time travel, Nikola Tesla, these are quite extreme, you know, I wouldn't even say concepts, but realities for a lot of people to grasp. Can you take us through a little bit of that as well?
Yeah, so this is my last book. You know, the Designated Disruptor is actually a follow-up to the Trump Code. And so the Trump Code is probably one of the funnest books I ever got to write. And what it explores is, you know, you may have heard of Ingersoll Lockwood, and he's this 19th century lawyer and author. He wrote what's called the Baron Trump Collection, and it's a series of children's novels about a boy named Baron Trump who lives in Castle Trump on Fifth Avenue, you know, in New York City, where Trump Tower now stands. Yeah. He's guided by Don, the master of all masters, and they go on time traveling adventures. And so that, you know, that sort of caught the public's imagination. There's been, you know, videos and TikTok videos got millions and millions of views. You know, Trump a time traveler, you know. And so we looked at that, and then the final book in the series is called The Last President. And it says that this populist president is elected, and then the anarchists and the socialists converge on Castle Trump, shouting death to the rich man, and this chaos breaks out. The military is called in, and at the end of the book actually says that Washington, D.C. is destroyed. So people have asked, you know, somehow prophetic in nature. So I looked at that, and then you've also got this interesting connection to Tesla, this genius inventor. And I think it was in 1943, he's at the end of his life, and he was living in a hotel in New York City. And of course, you know, there was a lot of interest in him because he talked about the death ray gun that he invented, and time travel along with Einstein and that kind of thing. And so the FBI actually had Donald Trump's uncle, I forget his name, but he actually was asked by the FBI to go look at all of Tesla's research. And so there's like 80 trunks of, like, you know, documents and research and writings and that kind of thing. And he took a look at it, and then it came back, and the official version was, I don't think there's anything of national security interest here. But then some of the documents went missing. And so the speculation has been since then that, you know, maybe the government's used some of these genius ideas from Tesla to invent, you know, is there some kind of time travel technology they might have, some primitive one or something, 0-point energy, all kinds of different things. And of course, we know that, you know, Elon Musk was inspired to, you know, create his car company, Tesla, by Tesla. So there's all this sort of interconnections. And so the book sort of explores this 5,000 piece jigsaw puzzle of, you know, how does Trump fit into all this? Why is his family connected to this? What's really going on? What does the government actually have? And how does this fit into unfolding in time events?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Again, because there's a lot of things that are going on in the world. And I think when people try and apply a little bit of out there science or theories to it, it starts making a little bit more sense. Okay, because there's a lot of coincidence. And those books about Baron Trump were crazy. Right? I mean, and again, you talked about the surge of people returning to religion. And I'm going to just sort of take us to a different topic for a second, on to Charlie Kirk, because when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, I'll be honest, it's been a long time since a world event has happened where I felt the world felt the impact so much, right? And I mean, I'll be honest, I just knew him as the funny meme guy that would shut down liberals on my YouTube short feed, you know? And when I seen his face, I realized who he was. And do you think that there's been a secondary wave of people trying to grab hold of faith since that event took place as well.
Yeah, this is sort of the strange thing about these two books is as I was finishing up the Trump Code, that was when the attempted assassination of President Trump occurred. So I actually rewrote the beginning of the book and led off with that.
Right,
And then
nice.
as I was finishing up Designated Disruptor, the assassination of Charlie Kirk occurred, and so I led off Designated Disruptor with his assassination because he's sort of like the ultimate designated disruptor. And as tragic as that thing was, I got a text message from President Trump after, it goes out to millions of people after that happened, saying go to church. And so we went to church that Sunday after Charlie Kirk got killed, and the place was just packed out, mostly young people. And it was like that for months afterward here in Irvine, California. And we saw a similar phenomenon across the country. Lucas Miles, who's connected to Turning Point USA, he said they're having like a network of like 9,000 pastors. And so they're getting, messages from all these pastors saying they're seeing a 25-50% increase in churches across the country. So I think the young generation was really impacted by his death, and it had this, sort of counterintuitive impact of drawing people back to church. They wanted, because they were talking about heaven. So a lot of people became curious about heaven. And just as that whole thing happened, I had another book come out called I've Been to Heaven about this IT guy and his wife, who's a hospital doctor. He had COVID-19 and he was on a ventilator for 45 days. And while she was fighting to keep him alive, this angel, supposedly took him on this journey to heaven. So he had this amazing journey to heaven. So that came out at the same time. So it's just all sort of like these, strange coincidences that were connected to all this. And so I think, there's quite a phenomenon going on with this sort of revival breaking out among young people, not just here, but, in Europe and throughout the world.
Okay, let me ask you a couple of sort of out there questions for this, because we had Triple I Atlas or whatever it was called, that big thing flying past Earth. A lot of people, including myself, were like, this could be it. Okay, this could be it. And then you find out that a near miss is like 487 billion miles away from Earth, I don't know how near a miss that is. I'm going to be honest with you, Troy. There was quite a lot of hype around that. Do you think there's more to our universe, and the lack of true acknowledgement of life out there is a fear for the foundation of the Western world when it comes to Christianity and other religions? Because a lot of people are quite happy just to say, hey, do you think God just stopped with us? He created the aliens. He created, I'm cool with that. Just so you know, Troy, if that's your answer, I'm totally down with accepting that as the answer. But do you think there is an underlying fear of what could turn up in the skylines?
Well, yeah. I mean, as scientists and theologians and philosophers, really delve into the sort of the true grand nature of reality. Scientists say there could be 11 dimensions, and we only live in a few of them. So what's in these other dimensions? And so I've talked to like Hugh Ross at Reasons to Believe. He's an astrophysicist connected to JPL, and he says that some of these alien craft that that crash, when they go to the crash site, there's no alien craft there, but there's like vegetation that's been like crushed and trees knocked over and that kind of thing. And so he says a lot of his friends at NASA and JPL believe these are interdimensional in nature. So what exactly is going on here? I mean, we've had my dad owned a fish cannery. I think it was back in the late 50s, and he and all the fishermen are out on the dock, and then they see all these like lights up in the sky about a mile up, like an armada. And he said they're all watching it, and all of a sudden it shoots through the atmosphere. This is fast as like lightning. Mm-hmm. And so he saw something like this. And so there's been thousands and thousands of reports of these things all around the world for not just the last century or so, but there's artwork that goes back thousands and thousands of years of these supposed crafts. So what is the true nature of our universe and our world? There's recent series, I think it's on Netflix on disclosure, and perhaps the government's getting close to revealing what's really happening. And of course, most Christians, the predominant view is this is probably spiritual in nature. The Book of Enoch talks about these fallen angels giving technology to early humanity resulted in civilization and writing and that kind of thing. And so, could there be like technology in these other dimensions? And we don't know all the answers, but it's a very curious phenomenon that's occurring now.
Yeah, and of course we're now in the era of quantum science and quantum computers, and us still being too dumb as a race to understand what it means when a little tiny quantum computer leaves our reality and then comes back with a bunch of information from another reality. Like this is happening now, and there's been, and forgive me for not remembering the legal terminology, but there's been a big public court case in America all last year about UFOs, okay, about unidentified flying objects. And multiple times, the American government has acknowledged the existence of other life out there. And why is that not front page news, Troy? Like, I remember sitting, I think it must have been about 4 o'clock in the morning in Scotland, and I'm watching this clip of this guy, just sat there under oath saying, 100%, there's other life out there. And I guess I feel like it is so heavily suppressed because there is this fear that not only elites, but the systems that are in place all crumble when that happens. But of course, interdimensional is almost the new unbelievable outer space, if that makes sense. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you think that even if it is interdimensional, they'll still try and twist it so that it simplifies it for us, that it's just people from another planet?
Well, I was a lady at the Bank of England, just like, I think it was a story in the Daily Mail last week, talking about if this information is released by the government, it could have a gigantic impact on the global financial system. So that could be a concern, of the government, and what kind of impact, the disclosure of this information can have. I remember when I was writing the Trump Code, I think it was the Defense Intelligence Agency, I think it was the Sun newspaper had filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the Defense Intelligence Agency about what they had on UFOs and that kind of thing, and they fought a court battle and came back, and the agency released documents talking about sort of this this time travel technologies and quantum physics and these craft that are being supposedly examined and researched. And so I think the government has a lot of stuff, but usually when prophecy guys and prophecy experts I've interviewed, what they believe is that this is spiritual in nature. The chance of some alien civilization actually coming to Earth, and unless they could like go through a wormhole or through some kind of interdimensional kind of situation, is pretty much impossible because they're so far away, and the journey through space is so long. So the people I've interviewed think that this is interdimensional, and that might fit in with what the Bible talks about as a powerful delusion, this great deception that could help the Antichrist rise to power. And so if the government comes out and says that UFOs and aliens are true and they actually arrive in some form, then they could perhaps say, we have all or many solutions for humanity. We can help save you. We can address your poverty, nuclear war.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And so, could that be a gigantic psyop? Could it be real? Could it be fallen angels? We just don't know. But there's been books written on this, and I've read them, and I've interviewed a lot of these guys that talk about this.
Yeah, it fascinates me because I just feel like I have so little trust for the governing bodies of this spinning ball in space, Troy, that they've spent all this money convincing us little green men come from other planets. I just don't see them switching up and going, oh, by the way, it's interdimensional. Oh, and by the way, we might have not went to the moon. Oh, and by the way, endless space might be a bit of a long shot here, because it's all so vastly unknown. I mean, when we talk about how much of our known solar system we've explored, seen, and known, it's terrifyingly tiny, Troy. It's terrifyingly tiny. We haven't even reached the bottom of the sea yet, bro. Do you know what I mean? Like it's one of those. So we are pretty primitive when we imagine what it would take to reach us. And when you're talking there about wormholes and all this, when we look at science fiction, everything has some sort of super fast mode. We had light speed, we've got warp drives, all of this. And the wormhole factor of bending space in on itself so that you can effectively go through a hole where the two holes meet, that is becoming one of these theories that when you look at the Large Hadron Collider and you look at and when CERN was turned on, do you think that projects like CERN and the Hadron Collider have a more sinister reason for existence, or do you think it's got more to do with the dimensions?
I think the research that's going on with CERN and different things the government's doing is probably far more advanced than what we're being told. And so could they be tapping into these other dimensions? I think they probably are. And was it Elon Musk talked about summoning the demon, and different things like that. And there's a lot of concerns about how fast artificial intelligence might become super intelligence and the danger that might pose to humanity. And so I think we're seeing all these things sort of converge together. And the Apostle John, he talked about the image of the beast. And could that be some kind of like merger of the Antichrist with artificial intelligence and transhumanism and that kind of thing? And so you're seeing all these technologies, all this research, and what is CERN doing? Is built atop, I think, the old Temple of Apollo in on the border of Switzerland and France, if I recall correctly. And so why did they choose that place, right? And the Revelation 9:11 talks about Apollyon coming out of the bottomless pit. And so this is like these Bible writers trying to describe something that might happen thousands of years in the future. And so these are all very interesting things that are happening in our world. In some sense, it's exciting time to be alive to learn about all these things.
Yeah, and they're making a larger CERN now as well. There's a project that's 4 to 5 times as large as the original CERN. It apparently goes through 4 countries. I think once we see CERN 2.0, that's when we're going to start seeing the real, whether it's the real plan or whether it's the grand lie that they're going to cover for this interdimensional technology, because there's something severe has gone on since CERN was turned on. Troy, I mean, we've seen the Mandela effects. People call it mass hysteria or mass something or other, where we all misrepresent or hear something. But there's a few of them where cases are, when somebody's saying that it's Sex in the City or Sex and the City, and it's turning up with merchandise with the wrong logos on it and things like this. Have you looked into any of the Mandela effects or any of the theories behind that?
Yeah, I haven't researched that yet, but one of the last books I wrote was called Revelation 9:11 with Pastor Paul Bagley, and we delve into that very curious chapter in Revelation 9. It talks about this 200 million man like demonic army or something like that comes out of the bottomless pit. And so as they do all this research, could they open up the portal between dimensions and what might come through, and so that there's these very curious things in the book of Revelation that talk about possibility of these interdimensional beings, these fallen angels, actually manifesting on earth during the tribulation period. And so the research we're doing, could that open up the veil between the dimensions? So that's something I've delved into.
Another interesting one is that the whole concept of a new dimension that's going to destroy us, okay, metaphorically speaking, is AI. The AI is the new dimension. And with all the knowledge of how to control humans available on the internet, people thinking that the smartest plan for the AI would be to build Terminators and come out and go after us. It really wouldn't. It would be to manipulate us through religious ideology around the world and to try and pull people into this false representation of a higher power that I believe would be a smarter move for the machines. Do you think that's possible, that could be the new dimension? Yeah. Metaphorically speaking, if you see what I'm saying, Troy.
Yeah, a lot of these guys that help develop AI, they're coming out openly saying that once we hit sort of this super intelligence AI, that it may just decide that humanity is a threat to it, and because once it goes beyond the constraints we've placed on it and has the ability to maybe make robots or super soldiers or even like perhaps release some kind of bioweapon. There's all kinds of research being done on bioweapons that can kill certain segments estimates of the population, that kind of thing. And so, is that a possibility? They're openly issuing warnings. I'm writing a new book right now, and so I've been pulling up a lot of these quotes of these guys saying this stuff. And so I think everything's happening so fast. There's sort of like this prophetic acceleration of all this knowledge. The prophet Daniel talked about this explosion in knowledge in the last days, and we're certainly seeing that happen now. And so I think it would be very good to sort of pull back the reins on AI and be wise about how we unleash this upon the world.
And symbolism is another thing that people get drawn into. And I always think it's very, very funny how just the abbreviation of artificial intelligence is AI. And I, of course, is one of the few letters that's also a word. And AI, a singular I, has been a symbol of secrecy, Illuminati, the Masons, the freaking back of the dollar bill. Do you think that some of the things that we stare in the face are by design? And do you think that there is an other side of the coin, an eviler side of the coin, that likes to sort of subtly boast about their evil doings in plain sight?
Well, when we first started talking, I mentioned my ancestor Friedrich von Schiller wrote, Ode to Joy, that Beethoven set to music in the Ninth Symphony, and actually he lived in the late 1700s. Almost all his friends were actually members of the original Bavarian Illuminati that was in Germany. And as far as I can tell, he never really joined, but toward the end of his life, he was writing some plays that sort of had hidden meanings embedded in them. And then mysteriously, he died young at age 45, and there was a lot of questions about it. Could he have been poisoned? There's different, people that were talking about that, and he was sort of hastily buried in the middle of the night in a mass grave. And so my grandma would talk about this. The Illuminati existed, and then the government officials at the time, they discovered this messenger who was taking documents from one place to another. I think he got hit by lightning, and they found these documents that talked about overthrowing the monarchies of Europe and the Catholic Church, and so the Illuminati was banned. And so the speculation, and supposedly they ended, like in the early 1800s, but the speculation has been, did they go underground? Did they infiltrate, Freemasonry? And so the top levels of Freemasonry now, like Illuminized Freemasonry. And, of course, we've all heard about all the different secret societies, the Bilderberg Group, and, Bohemian Grove, and Skull and Bones, and all these different kind of things. And so
of course, yeah.
I interviewed a lady who claimed to be a former Illuminati member here a few years ago, and she said that they have what's called the plan. And the plan is to, implement this world government, which Alice Bailey at the Lucius Trust said would be coming online by 2025. So we're right in that ballpark. And she said the plan involves some like super sophisticated deception involving the second coming and technologies, and so it's going to be so mind blowing that people would fall for it. And so I think perhaps we're seeing this happen. And so there's been a long term plan, in the background. Of course, there's a spiritual battle going on. The angels and Satan and demons duking it out in these other dimensions. And so the Bible talks about this powerful delusion. So perhaps that's what we're seeing unfolding.
Yeah, I think with the one world government side of things, the new world order, let's just sum it up as that, right? I've never felt so inclined to believe that we're taking steps forward into the dark side of the force, shall we say, Troy, than what's going on in the UK right now. Okay, it's absolutely insane, because you always, in the UK, we're quite lucky. We can see the bad guys coming from all sides. We're a tiny island, right? And we've done pretty well at keeping people the F away, right? We've done pretty well. And the only real way that you could sneak people in here is the way that it's happened now, through French tourism, shall we call it, Troy. And allowing a situation to occur where we, the people, start begging for the things that we've talked about not wanting. Digital ID, one world governments through the world. Hey, we never seen this invasion happen. We need a one world government. We need to tighten our belts. We need X, Y, and Z. I've never felt so much like I'm in the middle of the New World Order's plan right now. And do you think that one side we've got the Trump and the peace board, which, by the way, if I was worried about China, okay, I would want a peace board where most of the countries surround China. I'm just saying, he done a good, he's nailed that, and he got them all to pay $1 billion. I mean, come on. So, are we going to see the slow manipulation of the masses through one world government, through the eyes of a savior doing things for us rather than what I feel we're going to do here, which is asking for things? Because it's two different things, and the power of choice seems to be prevalent in this.
Well, I think the good news is that, because of shows like yours and books like I write and many, many different people, are openly talking about this. So there's been sort of this global awakening that's occurred. So people are sort of somewhat aware of what's happening now. So that's a good thing. But the downside is a lot of younger people, polls show that socialism and communism is more popular than it used to be. And so that's sort of, connected to this one world government idea. And so I think that the only way this could actually happen, this whole thing could actually come online, there's so some great crisis and a total massive economic collapse. Klaus Schwab talked about the great reset of capitalism. We have soaring levels of massive debt worldwide. America's, 38 trillion national debt, I think 140 trillion unfunded liabilities. Governments across the world are sort of skyrocketing levels of debt. There's threats of nuclear war all the time. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists just released their new doomsday clock, and I think it's the closest it's ever been to midnight, warning of possible nuclear war and artificial intelligence and these kind of threats. And so we're living in this very dangerous, pivotal time in history. And so I think that if it ever happened, it would be some kind of great crisis. And so people would feel compelled to go along with it, like we saw with the pandemic,
But we've got to save the infrastructure, Troy. Okay, it's got to be non-disruptive methods. Rioting, as long as it's your property, private property that's being damaged, that's okay. Okay, they'll allow a little bit of that. But I mean, I think you're right. I mean, it's apparent and it's happening. And I think with everything that's going on here, my concern is I think we're looking at the two different versions of the same sales pitch. Trump is gone for the peace approach. Okay, I mean, that's what the big sign said, peace board. And I think Stalmer, the lunatic, absolute treasonous individual who is shenaniganing around with all of my existence here, is going to be the other side of the coin. But in saying that, maybe that's what the ICE scenario in America is. Maybe that's the trigger, that it's the same version of what's going on here, but it's a different scenario, but it's still fear tactic. It's still violence in the streets and disorder. I just don't know. It worries me though, because I mean, at least your president is like headstrong for his people, right? At least you can see, even if it's all lies, and we got it totally wrong, Troy, and he plays for the other team, at least his public image is projecting this, I'm for the people. Our guy, mental, Troy, mental. He's like, and I'm not saying anything, okay, but there's a reason why you guys have the right to bear arms over there, okay? Kind of lets everyone know what could happen, right? There could be if the people rise up, they're heavily, we're screwed, Troy, we're screwed. And I feel like our designated disruptor, right? It ain't a designated disruptor from the place you think it's come from. I think, sadly, we have been sucked into a ploy that is to eradicate our way of life over here. And it's going to be done through the assimilation, the non-assimilation, hang on a second, the non-integration and the assimilation mindset from our tourists, shall we say. What's your opinion on what's going on globally? There's been a lot of unreported unaliving of people who are part of the Christian faith across Africa and around the world. And do you think that, I mean, I found the suppression of it alarming. What's your take on that? Because when we talk about a spiritual battle, even though I'm not part of the big three religions, Troy, I'm very aware of how much you like to smash the living crap out of each other around the world throughout history. All the religions, okay? It's just we've sort of boiled down to three major ones now instead of it being tens of thousands of tiny little tribes smashing the crap out of their neighbors. So I'm not trying to say it's just the big three. But I mean, what's your take on the unalivings that are taking place?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think we've ever seen levels of killing, these tragic killings of people all around the world, Christians, different religions. It's really become a very serious problem. And, there's not a lot that governments are doing to address this. And so this sort of emboldens these people that are persecuting others and killing people and executing them. It's a very terrible thing that's happening. And so, I mean, that's why I wrote this book, Designated Disruptor. I mean, the real purpose was to show that revival is pretty much the only hope for humanity. That's what Billy Graham foresaw. And so just by this, strange coincidence, I got that interview with him. We called for this National Day of Repentance. That happened, and now we're seeing this revival breakout. That's what he foresaw might happen. And so you're seeing revival take place in England and throughout Europe and in America and around the world. And Rabbi Jonathan Cahn, who wrote The Harbinger, a number of best-selling books. I interviewed him a couple of years ago, and he said revival is the only hope for the world. And so I think we're in this period of time where God's holding things back. He's helped Trump fight back against the beast system, push back against globalism, trying to turn things around in America. You've got different people around the world doing the same thing, but I think revival, turning back to God, is the hope. And that's why Billy Graham told me the story of Nineveh. It's the only nation in the Bible that repented and turned back to God, and that God did not judge them. And so that's sort of the hope. And so I think as long as people turn back to God, this revival grows. God will extend His mercy, and we'll see this thing, continue. But if we don't, then we very well could move into these events of the Book of Revelation.
And do you feel that the organized side of Christian faith is as important as people's personal connection with, say, Jesus, or choosing to worship in their own way? Do you think the structure of organized religion is what people need?
Oh, I mean, if you think of the term organized religion, religion to a large extent is, somewhat corrupt. And, Jesus talked about the last days church being lukewarm. I think we see that today. So there's, the polls show there's only like about 5-6% of people actually have a biblical worldview. So it's a small percentage that actually believe the whole Bible. And organized religion is not the solution, but Jesus is the solution. And, he came here 2,000 years ago, died on the cross for our sins so we could be forgiven. And if you simply ask Him to, forgive you of your sins, come into your heart, transform your life, he'll do that. And that's what I've experienced, and millions of people have. Yeah. And so I think that's the hope is Jesus Christ, and not organized religion. There's all kinds of forms of organized religion, and maybe good for your conscience and help you become a better person. But in terms of eternal salvation, that's what the Bible tells us.
I'm with you. So the reason I'm asking that is everyone that I know that is part of the of belief in Jesus Christ, right? None of them have anything to do with the church. Okay, they really have nothing to do with it. Now, what worries me is if we have an entire generation moving forward where they're turning the back on the organized branding of that religion, and we see a decline in churches. Could that not be seen as a decline in the faith, right? And leave room for other faiths to sort of fill that void? Are you worried about the disconnection? Because, I mean, let's be honest, Christianity, that's really what Western, most of the Western world is part of, especially in the UK, especially in America. Like, churches are the symbol of that. And with all of the just atrocities that cannot be denied, that have taken place. That's a big reason why I think people don't want anything to do with the symbology or the iconography or the dare I say it, the ministers in some cases. Do you think that the damage that these individuals have done with reducing people's faith in the institution is going to be what self-destructs the organized power that this faith has? And if it does, is that when we're going to see a shift of a new religion come in?
Well, I think you've touched on a very, very, important thing that's happening, and so a lot of people have lost faith in the church, the organized church, and have seen all this corruption taking place and the fall of the ministers and this kind of thing, and so it has had a big impact. And I think this is it's just the Bible talks about the wiles of the devil, sort of the arrows and darts, and so I think this is a strategy of the devil to try to weaken the church and push people to some kind of new religion. So like Yuval Harari has come out and said that AI could potentially rewrite the Bible, and we could have a more, I guess, politically correct, Bible. And so, could there be, some kind of new religion that's presented at some point? And that's what the Book of Revelation talks about: a one world government, economic system, and perhaps like some kind of a cult-based religious system. Mm-hmm. And so, polls show that the small percentage, still believe the Bible, but the people that go to church, it's like maybe like 2/3 sort of mix different religions together, New Age kind of beliefs and Hinduism and Buddhism and, all kinds of different things. So sort of this smorgasbord of beliefs that a lot of people that go to church, sort of subscribe to. And so I think you're right that these things could ultimately result in some kind of new religion that's not biblical Christianity.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I think when you take the story of Jesus and look at Jesus as just a guy that accomplished a lot, it's an incredible individual to want to emulate. There's a lot of good stuff. He's a pretty chill guy, likes to do some woodwork. You know what I'm saying? Looks like the sort of person that would hug a tree and convince you that's how to worship him, and I'm okay with that. I mean, my God is a war god with one eye. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a big difference between what 2026 and what the world should be looking at and what 600, 700, 800, 900 years ago, how the world was. And I think what you said there is spot on with this sort of new religion that will come through. And I think we're going to see one of two things. I think we're going to see Christianity stay the same and come back to grassroots. So mom and pop churches, little churches, and those churches disconnecting from the machine that is the, those dudes running up and down the super churches, giving it the, all of this stuff. Come on, let's dial it back a little bit. Because it's a billion dollar industry. It's wild. And I think some people get something from that, but I think they get more from, it's like being at a concert, some of these churches, Troy. Do you know what I mean? If you were surrounded by another 3,000 or 4,000 people all screaming, we're all having a good time. I'm not going to lie. It doesn't matter where you are. You're probably going to be having a good time. But I think the disconnection from what it was to have faith for a lot of people has been lost. And I think that's what people are trying to reconnect with, is the individual connection that they have with their chosen deity, if you will. And I think that's where it's going to go. Or we're going to see a religion form where everyone's just all right with being Jesus believing, witchy, magic using hodgepodge. Do you see what I'm saying? What's your take? Do you think that the people are just sick of the corporation factor, and that could be something that we're going to see people shift away from?
Yeah, I think that's why this revival we're seeing break out is mostly among young people, and so that they've grown up on the smartphones and the internet, computers, and all these different technologies, which sort of isolated them, and so now they're seeking what's real. A lot of kids are listening to old records again. when we were kids, you'd listen to a record, and it could actually be like something to sit down and actually do. Listen to the music, and so they're seeking what's real things, and so they want the real stuff that talks about in the New Testament, the signs, the wonders, the miracles, the supernatural stuff, the healings, the things that the Bible talks about. The whole Bible is like supernatural. It's all these miracles. I think it's like 2016, my wife said, "Why don't you start keeping a journal of things that seem miraculous in nature in our lives?" And so every time we pray and it seemed like God would intervene in some way, I jot it down. And so it's now grown to like 300 pages, like 280 entries of just like miracle after miracle in our lives. Here a few years ago, my wife ended up in the hospital with COVID-19, and she had acute sepsis, severe pancreatitis, and it was just like super sick. The doctor told me she had a 50-50 chance of living. So I asked everybody to pray for her, and they did. And I believe God saved her life. And then we got this gigantic hospital bill. And I was like, Lord, how are we possibly going to pay for this thing? So I asked everybody to pray again. And we submitted all our financial paperwork to the hospital. I thought maybe they'd drop it 25%, maybe 50 or something. And they came back and forgave the entire bill. So that's just like one example of miracles that God.
You got the Jesus discount, bro.
Yeah.
You got the JC discount is what you got there. See, it's incredible, right? Because let me just play devil's advocate for a minute, right? Because I'm a big believer in the power of belief and will and intent, okay? And I believe that humans have this pre-programmed flaw that it's far easier for us to believe in a higher power than to believe in ourselves, okay? It's almost more powerful for some people, the belief that they would have in their faith and the power that can come from their belief in asking, okay? I believe, I could argue that you manifested all of this into existence through, but again, you possibly couldn't agree with me because you've not manifested, you've made a request for manifestation. But your belief is so solid in something that it makes it true. And there's no right or wrong answer to this, but the belief, right? I've never been a blind faith person, Troy. That's where I disconnect from my religious experience is very different to most. I had a very profound religious experience in the woods somewhere. And there are people who, whether they call it religious moments, miracles, or magic, or manifestation, I believe we're all capable of willing things into existence. But I believe that humans' belief in our capabilities is like an iceberg, right? Oh, I believe in these things is the 10% that sticks out the water. And the other 90% is deep-rooted disbelief and zero faith in what they're saying. But I believe by handing over that faith to a God, it increases our ability to believe in what could be because we don't necessarily believe what we're capable of.
Yeah. I think that the Bible makes it clear that that faith in God is what's necessary for these miraculous things to happen. And so I think you're talking about a sort of a universal a phenomena that's common to all humanity, regardless of what you believe. That if you,
right, exactly.
Yeah,
there you go. Exactly. And that's what fascinates me because we're all effectively doing the same thing. We're projecting outward for something that we would like to come towards us or inward. And it's just a different sales pitch that we're all doing. You're asking God, I'm putting my will and intent out there. Other people who are complete atheists and think we're talking absolute mumbo jumbo will believe, I wanted it so much. I willed it. I wished it to happen because, wishes are okay. Okay. Higher powers aren't okay, Troy, for these people, but wishes, they're real. And it fascinates me because it's just a sales pitch that's different. The outcomes are the same, and the real threads that bind these things together are the same. And it always fascinates me because see if we'd all just shut up and stop arguing about the journey to the points that we're disagreeing on. The journey are the things we argue about. The points that we're arriving at are usually the things we all agree on. And if we could just shut up and just understand that you can exist with other cultures, you can exist with other religions. It doesn't mean you have to go and conquer the world. And I think that's where people are sort of catching back up to now, is we've realized, actually, I do feel a lot more tribal than global. And I think we all want our little bits of normality back from corporations and evildoers and treasonous governments. And, a big question mark on Trump for me. We'll see. He's either going to, and this is what I say, Troy, he's either going to be the hero of the world, okay, or the exact opposite. I don't think there's a middle ground for Trump. I don't think it's a middle ground for him. So my verdict's still out on him, but I love your take on this whole topic of the designated disruptor. I think it's fascinating. I'm definitely going to get your previous books as well that go into the time travel and all of that. That sounds freaking awesome. But listen, we're coming to the end of the hour. Is there anything else that you want to just hit us with? If it's inspirational moment, inspirational whatever. And then once you've done that, let us know what you've got coming. And of course, all your links are in the description. Your new book, The Designated Disruptor, is available now.
Well, yeah, it's been a great honor to be on your show, and I just end with, as you're talking about this, I just thought about, this new scientific research into quantum physics and vibrational kind of things, and so at the scientific level, the mathematical level, a lot of these things in the Bible are true, but a lot of things that you're saying are true about the nature of belief and faith and that kind of thing. So I wrote Designated Disruptor to inspire people, to to find their mission, their assignment, their task, in this revival that's breaking out. And so, I think God, the Bible talks about from the foundation of the world, God has a plan for our lives. And so, if you just sort of ask him, he'll guide you into that, and you can become a designated disruptor. I think there's literally millions and millions of designated disruptors. We all have different roles, talents, tasks that are helping fight back against this corporate system, the global, this global government that's trying to come online, this beast system. And so I think there's a moment of great hope here, and that's what I wanted to leave your audience with, is that there is hope. Billy Graham foresaw this. We're watching it unfold, and so it's all hands on deck.
100%. Listen, there's a reason why they call us the 99% and they're the 1%, Troy. There's a reason they don't want this on a field, us battling the 1% versus the 90%. It has to be done through control. It has to be done through puppetry. And we have to assume that the counterattacks to that have to be just as secrety and just as puppety. And how this is all going to play out, Troy, only time will tell. Okay. Personally, I'm ready for the aliens. Okay. Like, I think we're all ready for us as a race to just be humbled a little bit and just sort of go, actually, maybe we'll all just get along, actually. But in saying that, now I say that, is that not me now just saying one world government? Like, have I not just given the sales pitch for how we're going to unite as a planet? Oh God, that's a whole other podcast, Troy. Listen, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to everyone for watching. Thank you to the mods. Thank you to the Shaun Attwood channel. I will see you all later, possibly this evening over on my channel. I'll let you guys know. If not, I will see you tomorrow right here. And thank you all once again from me, Ron Swanson. Be safe out there.